Well, hello and welcome to CTO Con 2023. My name is Bryce, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator and sit down here with Nami, where we're going to learn more lessons from scaling security in a high growth company. As the world becomes more increasingly digital, it's crucial for organizations to prioritize security, privacy, and resiliency in the face of ever evolving cyber threats. So today, we're really excited. We're going to hear from our guest on our challenges that he has faced while scaling security measures in a high growth companies and the strategies they've employed to overcome them. So we'll discuss the latest trends in security and privacy, as well as practical tips for leaders to secure these aspects, to ensure these aspects remain a top priority. So I'm excited to learn from Nami on this. So Nami, you're the Vice President of Security at FBN. So can you do us a little favor and just kind of introduce your company and a little bit of a background on yourself?
Sure. Happy to be here. So I am leading up security for FBN, which is an ag tech company. So agriculture tech. Been here for 4 months, and it's a new industry for me. So prior to this, I had a short stint at Swivel in the Middle East, but before that, I led up security for Spotify. So a great example of a high growth company trying to scale security there. And then prior to that, I did various roles in cybersecurity at Capital One. So I've been in this field for 23 years, been in security for my entire career, which has sort of brought me to this place today.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So no kidding, like in regards to Spotify and Capital One, I mean both those platforms are pretty heavy in regards to cybersecurity aspects. So yeah, you definitely had your work cut out for you. Awesome. So why don't we go ahead and dive in a little? So some of the questions that we have for you. I guess one of the biggest ones is, in high growth companies, they face unique security challenges, as they scale, such as managing increasing amounts of data and managing security across multiple systems. So what are some of the strategies that these companies can use to address these types of challenges?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge at any high growth company is the pace at which they're moving, right? Growth is a priority, and being innovative to achieve that growth is a priority. So you have to understand the objectives of the organization and make sure that your security program and the capabilities you build sort of fit into that ecosystem. Gone are the days where security could just put up roadblocks and say, look, we need to approve everything. Like you have to let people move at their own pace, and you have to figure out how you build security products that meet the organization and fit into their ways of working. So that's really, really important. One of the things I learned at Spotify, which was having a product based approach, even for internal services,
Mm,
and really understanding how the engineers work, how their workflows work, what the business needs, and building security capabilities that naturally fit into
mm,
their workflow as opposed to being on the side or being an interrupt. So that's really, really important. The other thing I would say is and this is true for any organization, you have to have buy-in. So as a head of security, as a CISO, you got to be able to sell security. You got to bring people along, and you got to show the value, but also do it in a manner where you show where it's not just as, there is value, there is business value in security. The key is make sure that you're taking care of the foundations, focus on the foundations, and then pick your battles. So
yeah.
find the biggest risk and have systematic programs to go tackle those risks, because part of the challenge of security is security can build capabilities.
Hmm.
Driving adoption
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and getting rid of the tech debt is the hard part. Don't take on too much. You're not going to be able to do it. Focus on the fundamentals and keep that ongoing, but then pick the large rocks that you need to move and systematically sort of go after them, but don't try to take on too much.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many nuggets in there, Nami, that you provided. I mean, the biggest one for me is, the importance of cybersecurity, especially in a high growth company, is there, right? You want to de-risk things, especially for your clients or your internal clients. But the other aspect is, and you made a really a good point of pointing it out of like you don't want it to be a blocker in the process. You don't want it to create a whole nother, you don't want to slow anything down. You don't want to create more of a burden on people because number one, it's going to slow down the growth. But number two, just what you mentioned before, the adoption isn't going to be there if you make it more and more difficult.
Correct. Yeah. So, look, you have to meet uh, your engineers and your business where they are, as opposed to expecting them to meet you where you are.
Yeah,
You're part of an ecosystem, and make sure that you're building within that ecosystem and integrating with it
yeah,
seamlessly.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
that's the tricky part. That's where art meets science, right?
I think that's why I sort of mentioned the idea of introducing a product-based approach, even
Hmm.
for building internal security services. Like think of everybody as your customer,
Yeah,
and building a product that meets their needs. So you have to understand what their needs are and how they operate, and then building those security capabilities that basically plug into their ecosystem. It
yeah,
should be part of their regular
right.
how they work, as opposed to, as I use the term, interrupt or being on the side,
Hmm.
which traditionally has been true for security, because we like to have our own tooling, we like to manage our own processes, and
Right,
we
right.
have to do a better job at integrating into the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
important. That's important. So,
Yeah.
and I think this kind of stems into the next question I have for you, right? So, there's a, as we all know, there's an increased frequency in the cyber attacks, right? I mean, it's just happening. We hear stories about it all the time anymore. So, it's more important now to make sure that organizations prioritize security, right? So, but you need buy-in from all levels of the company to do so. How can organizations really ensure the security is a top priority throughout the entire company? From the individual contributors all the way up to like CEOs, co-founders, and the senior leadership.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is something that you have to continuously do and get buy-in. Like, I'm fortunate enough to have been in companies where I haven't had to sell security that much, but at the same time, you have to make sure that everybody's aware of the ramifications of security and what we should be
Mhm.
doing and
Yeah,
what's going on in the ecosystem, right? Uh, every you know every opportunity should be a teaching moment and a learning moment, and communicating openly with at all levels, right? And making sure that they have an understanding of what we need to do and why we need to do it. I'm a big believer in anything you do, you always start with the why,
yeah,
right? And it's really, really important for any audience to understand the reasoning behind we have the reasoning behind doing anything. Sometimes I've heard, like, people say, oh, security is just not going to allow us to do something. I've never had the attitude of saying no. I like to go in with, let's understand what the problem is and what you're trying to achieve, and let's work together to figure out a solution. And then there are cases where sometimes you have to say no, but you should be very clear on why we are
hmm
doing that.
hmm
And I think people generally understand, right? But education awareness at every level, and it's different for general workers and associates to senior management, right? There are different objectives and outcomes that you're looking for, but making sure that you're keeping light on things, because sometimes this good security means, oh, we haven't had an issue,
Yeah,
out of sight, out of mind,
right.
not a problem. The
Yep,
worst way to get attention on security is something bad happening. And trust
right.
me, things, I've been in those situations as well, where it's been something bad happen and all eyes are on security, and that's a little
Mhm.
too much, but that shouldn't be the reason. You should be able to you should be focusing on it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point, right?
Yeah,
So when, yeah, you don't want to be in the spotlight on that one when something goes south. And you know, you mentioned, you know, explaining the why behind it. I think it's crucial, right? That's crucial for any buy-in for any level for any part of the organization, right? A lot of times, like you said, so you know, cybersecurity is like you can't do that just because you can't do that. It's like, well,
yeah,
why? You know, what is the ramifications? What is the point? And I think that's huge, right? From any level of organization is providing that why, and that provides people realistically the backbone as to why it's incredibly important. And yeah, one of the things that I've always heard when it comes to any type of security at all, right? You know, especially in cybersecurity, is like you guys got to be correct 100% of the time,
yep.
right? The attackers just need to be right once,
Once, yep. That's
and you got to be ahead
it's
of
the
it.
world we live in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, you know, and that kind of stems into my next question as well. Is like, you know, they're constantly evolving. You know, you got to be one step ahead of the attackers. So the attacker's always trying to get a little bit more creative, if you will, and how they get into things, right? So how do you stay up to date on the latest security threats? Like how can organizations do that?
yeah. There's so many ways. Obviously, keep up with the news, keep up with trends, keep up with what's happening, keep your eyes pierced, and then build a good network. I think
Okay.
information sharing is a great thing. For the longest time in security, we used to keep everything to ourselves, and I think that's a terrible idea. I think open
Mhm.
information exchange is very very important to see
Okay.
what are your peers dealing with, what are the threats that they're dealing with, and then um, I also think about like evaluate your environment on an ongoing basis, right? Conduct um, um, threat models, make sure that you are taking all the latest threats into account, understanding what your weaknesses are, and
Hmm.
making sure that you are look, resources are always going to be limited, and you're going to have to make smart choices of where you put them. So come up with a methodology to identify your highest risks and focus on those. Um, and don't make an assumption that it's going to remain constant, right? So conduct an assessment on an ongoing basis,
Yeah.
and marry that up with what are the prevailing threats.
So building your network, do you have any advice on, you know, any of the people out there of like how to do that?
Yeah, that's it's a good question because I always tell people I'm terrible at doing that. But I've also got 23 years working in this field, so I have built up a lot of um, built up a lot of relationships with people in the field.
Mhm.
So I stay in touch with them. I I have I have the good opportunity to just pick up the phone and call somebody up and say, "Hey, well, what are you dealing with here?" Just because I am friends with them. But there are, obviously there are industry sharing groups as well.
Mhm.
There are all these services that connect you with different people in the technology field. Like we could leverage some of those. But
Mhm.
I'm a fan of building relationships. Like 23 years, if I haven't become friends with some of these people, then I'm probably doing something wrong.
It's a fair point. It's a fair
Yeah,
point. I could imagine LinkedIn probably has some really good groups to go after and kind of be part of, and you
there
know.
there are, and honestly, like even on LinkedIn, I've gotten hit up by people like that I don't even know, and they say, "Look, hey, we're interested in having conversation about this. Would you be interested?" And I've done the same. So
Yeah,
don't be shy about doing that.
that's a fair point. That's a
Yeah,
fair point. You know, kind of leverage that
we
part of the network too. Yeah,
we all
yeah,
face the same challenges. We really do, and I think uh, information sharing and relying on others can really, really help.
yeah, yeah. 100%. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess I gotta, something else is, when selecting and implementing security technologies, right? It's important to consider the factors like usability, integrations, and the ability to scale, right? Because even in hyper growth companies, high growth companies, or even like regular organizations that are just like in mature stages, they gotta look at it from a scale factor. So, what are some of the most important factors to consider?
I have a very strong opinion on this because there is a dime a dozen when it comes to
Yeah.
technologies and solutions, and they tout uh, to be the best thing that since sliced bread. Um, I, from my perspective, define your problem first
Mm,
without looking at solutions, because
oh,
many times what happens is we try to look at products and look at solutions and say, "Oh, this is great," and we sort of frame up our problem um, to align
I
with that
see.
solution.
Yeah.
So, define what you're trying to solve without taking into account what kind of solutions are out there. I'm also a big fan and proponent, especially in today's day and age where you have so many capabilities within the cloud.
Hmm.
Use native solutions as much as possible. Look, the more tooling you throw into the mix, the more complexity you're adding, right?
Okay.
So there's a lot you can do within cloud platforms and natively build capabilities, and a lot of these cloud platforms are introducing new security capabilities that are give you what you need. They might require a little more work. The open source world is actually grown quite a bit as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
But don't go after shiny objects. And when you are looking at solutions, I like platforms as opposed to a single solution device, single solution. It's a single use appliance. I don't want a single use appliance because
Hmm.
then I'm going to have a lot of single use appliances
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
individual solutions. So I like the ability to scale and not just do one thing, but look at platforms that give you an array of capabilities. So that's the way I think about evaluating and looking at solutions. And I think it always goes back to what is the problem we're trying to solve, as
Yeah.
opposed to I need this tool. I've
Yeah.
heard that a lot. They're like, we need to buy this tool. What for? What are we
Right.
trying to solve? And can we solve a good amount of it with just the capabilities we have or tooling that we already have?
Following the shiny objects, I think, is the best way to describe that. Because a new tool comes out and looks really cool. It's like, oh, we got to have that, and because X,
Yeah,
Y, and Z company has that, and we need to have it, and um, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and
I,
then
I, I did a talk on this a few years ago where it was actually one of the vendors who asked me to come and say, talk about the cutting edge technology and tools. And I think they were a little disappointed because my talk was all about stop following shiny objects,
mhm.
get your foundations right. How many of you can tell me that you have cracked the nut on patching?
Yeah,
Fix patching before you're going to go and get this, you know, advanced deception platform.
yeah,
How well are you
that's
patched?
that can that can go into multiple different directions as well. Like not even just on the side, but just any business practice. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I look, everything I've said right now I think it holds true for anything. Start with
yeah,
the why.
yeah, yeah,
I
hundred
think
percent.
it's the same. Same concepts apply.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, you mentioned like don't follow shiny objects. What are some of the pitfalls that people do run into when trying to find the right technology?
Uh, One, well, I think the one going after the shiny object looks really,
Hmm.
really good on paper. Two, not thinking about scalability and like
Mm,
being able to grow that platform and having limitations. Not testing appropriately, and also making decisions in a vacuum, especially in security,
yeah.
right? You need to get buy-in. Remember, the tooling you're going to run is going to run on somebody else's resources. So make sure that they're part of that process, because that's just going to help you in the long run. And you're not just testing for security. Don't, you have to look at functionality. You have to
Mhm.
care about the operational, uh, how to operationalize it. I've seen too many times that tools are bought and then you have a 1-year license and it took a year just to deploy the thing, and you're up
Right.
at renewal, and you're still having challenges because
Yeah.
didn't do the right testing, didn't have the right buy-in, didn't have the right people involved. um, and look at your infrastructure. I like simplicity as well, right?
Mhm.
If you're going to go and get something that is just going to be a bear to deploy, especially in today's day and age where
Mhm.
you can enable things on cloud platforms within a matter of minutes, you're probably going down the wrong path.
Right, right. And I
Yeah.
think that summarizes basically everything we just talked about, Nami. Like everything from start with the why, understand why the company's implementing it. If you don't understand why the company's implementing it, then that's a pitfall, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, you got to get their buy-in, right? The company's buy-in to, or the individuals to use the security. But the biggest piece is making sure it doesn't put a roadblock or hinder productivity, like
Right.
you said. Like it's in line. It's just part of the function. So I think those are all incredibly important things, worth repeating. um, yeah. So I guess the other one I want to talk about too is a lot of third-party vendors, right? So even here at Remote Base, we have a lot of plugins and things of that nature in our core product that we use. So that in itself introduces a whole nother security risk. So it's important to manage those relationships effectively. So what are some of the best practices to do that? Like if a company is looking to bring in a third party vendor, how do they make sure that everything is on the up and up and compliant with their security structure?
Yeah, I will say that third party management has gotten a lot more complex over the 23
Mm,
years I've been here. I remember being at Capital One and helping build the first sort of third party security assessment program, which was, hey, we're going to contract this third party to provide us services. They may have access to our systems and they have access to our data. It was a matter of talking to them, understanding what their security program looks like, the security posture, identifying risks, and making sure that we identify any risks, make sure we address them prior to signing contract, and then doing ongoing um, oversight like annual or biannual assessments.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
That is very, very different now because one, um, at the pace at which everybody moves, like, yes, that's the methodology that is quite widely used, but things change on a daily basis. I think that's still a very valid approach. Having a good third party due diligence program and
mhm,
making sure that you are getting assurance that they have the right security capabilities and controls commensurate to the risk of the relationship, and then doing ongoing oversight. Where it gets a little more challenging is gone are the days of, oh, we're signing this contract and we're going to be buying this product or buying this service or something along those lines.
mhm, mhm,
Now it's down to, hey, I just want to sign up for this SaaS solution and use this tool.
mhm.
Inadvertently, I am giving up my data to them because nothing is free. And I
Yeah,
may be
yeah.
installing extensions within my browser that I don't know where they came from or what their status is. And then the data that is being put into these systems is basically going into their cloud environment. And uh, so it gets a little more complicated because the click through agreements can be tricky. So
Mhm,
understanding those click through agreements and what you're signing up for, understanding who owns the data and who has the control over it, and also figuring out, like, if you're deploying these extensions within your desktops, within your browsers, what kind
mhm.
of risks they pose. So it's a little more complicated that way because there is so much tooling out there, and there's some really good tools out there, which, everybody wants to use from a productivity perspective. So, I
Yeah.
think there is an additional layer of due diligence that needs to be done. It's not just the big contracts. It could be as simple as somebody saying, I want to use Calendly, which is used
Hmm.
for, scheduling and stuff. It's
Hmm.
great. It's a great little tool because it makes life so much simpler. But it does ask for a lot of permissions on your calendar and your mail. So some of that is going to go back to your risk posture. How much risk are you willing to take? And
Yeah.
two, how well can you control, what goes into that environment? So you have to, the bottom line is you do your due diligence, you
Hmm.
establish your risk posture, and you set up the boundaries of where where what you will allow and what you won't allow. Because the best tool we really have still is the assessments and contractual obligations,
Yeah.
to really understand, do you take security seriously or not?
It's a fair point. That's a fair point. I mean, I can see the complexity, that you were talking about. Like, there's a lot of plugins, a lot of things that are just like, yeah, we just need access for X, Y, and Z, and
Yeah,
make sure that you understand that. And I think this also comes down. I think we have time for at least about one more question, if you don't mind, Nami.
sure.
Um, this comes down to communicating the security strategy, right? And practices like security strategies and practices to the customers, stakeholders. So, we can build trust and enhance the organization's response or the reputation. So, what are some of the ways that you found that's effective in communicating this information?
Look, you got to do it yourself. I think that's one of the
Okay.
things that I've learned. Um, I wherever I go, if the practice doesn't exist, at least go to the board once a year, give them an update on the state of the security program, give them an
Okay.
update on the security strategy, what we've been able to do and what we haven't been able to do. Right? Everything is not rosy all the time, so be very honest. Communicate with senior leadership on an ongoing basis, build relationships with them, and make sure that they understand what their role is. We say security is everybody's responsibility, but we have to take that a step forward and really make it real for them and define roles and responsibilities and say, look, what is your role? What is my expectation of you? And what do I give back to you? Right? What is the value of that and why
Yeah.
we are doing this? So communicating that strategy at every level and doing it yourself. I will. I'll dig back to my days at Capital One. And, I was there for a very long time, 18 years, and it was a founder-led company. And every year we had what they called the road show, and it became the strategy days. And it was basically the strategy that was created for the company. And the CEO would deliver it personally to each and every associate. Like they would rent out entire arenas to house people.
Wow.
And basically, he said, "Look, I tried this before. We created a strategy. I gave it to my man. I gave it to my man, delivered it to my managers, and said, go deliver to your rest of your teams." And then I went to somebody and said, "Hey, did you hear the strategy? And tell me about it." And he was like, "That was not the strategy that I wanted to communicate." So he said, "Till I am
Yeah.
here, I am going to make sure that you hear that strategy from me the way I want to tell that story of where we were, where we are, and where we're going." 18 years, every
18
year.
every
He
year.
went
18.
on from 4,000 people to 60,000 people,
Wow.
all across the United States, Canada, and the UK. He would
Yeah.
travel and he would deliver that himself. So
Yeah.
that was
So
very powerful. So I believe, like, look, you have a strategy, you should communicate it. Don't just send it out. Take every
yeah.
opportunity to engage directly with people.
Yeah. I think the prominent piece that I pull from that is, he went and asked the employees like what was the strategy, and
Yeah,
the feedback was like that wasn't the strategy that I wanted to communicate. So you have that telephone effect, right? So if this is an important strategy such as security, it should just be as linear or as direct as possible in the
Yeah.
communication. So
And
awesome.
also clearly identifying what the audience's role. So,
Mm,
if I'm talking to you, what do I expect of you and what you should expect of me? And having the same conversation with somebody else and tailoring that message to them.
awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. Nami, it was great. I learned a lot about cybersecurity just talking to you, just in these questions, and and I know you got a wealth of knowledge to share, and we really appreciate you carving out the time to answer some of the questions that I had for you, and share your experiences with us.
Happy to do it. It was a pleasure. Great meeting you as well.
Nice meeting you too, Nami. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryce.